Welcome back to the Goblin Curse of Hamlin. I'm author Dan Allen. I'm here with Davy the Dragon and Bridget the Bunny. We were just talking about Chapter 9. Man, the story's getting intense. Tobias and Matthias are both entering the tournament of the Duke of Hanover, and it's about to start. Let's read Chapter 10, The Hunt. After the evening's revelry was finished and the performers had all been sent off, the hunters retired to their tents. But Tobias and Matthias lay down on the ground in the square and rested their heads on their rucksacks. All was still, save the slow, smooth scrape of knives and arrowheads being honed on grinding stones. "I danced with the princess once," Matthias said reminiscently. "We passed together through a tunnel of arms, and she joined hands with me to form the end of the tunnel until all the dancers came through and the song was over." Tobias did not know what to say, as he was playing music the whole evening and had no chance to dance with the princess. Matthias sat up with an odd expression on his face. "She bid me wish you best of luck in the hunt." Tobias, who was propped up on one elbow to hear the tale, silently nodded in agreement. He was immediately buoyed up by a new confidence that seemed to spread strength into all his tired muscles. Then the two lay back upon the earth and fixed their eyes on the stars. "The best of luck to you, Matthias," Tobias returned, then added wisely, "but not too much." At this the friends shared a chuckle, before sleep passed the night into day, and with the breaking of the sun, a trumpet sounded from the parapet of the citadel, and the hunters were let out of the city gate to a great roar of applause. A sea of handkerchiefs waved by mothers and sisters sent them off, while the boys too young to enter the tournament whooped and hollered. But the bishop slept in, as he had drunk too much wine and missed the whole affair. Rich men on horses, rugged men with dogs, clever men with maps, and dangerous men of war with long bows and throwing knives and slings and rope for snares, and all such preparations, dashed from the castle gates, eager to catch the best prize. No dragons allowed. No, Davy, you cannot enter the tournament. How are humans supposed to compete with a dragon? That's what I'm talking about. Dragons. He wants to enter the tournament. Matthias left on foot near the front of the pack with only his knife at his side, a skin of water, a clutch of arrows in his right hand, and his bows in his left. Fleet as any of the men on horses, he vanished into the woods. No bunnies get killed in this story. Bridget, let me read. With all the hunters well on their way, Tobias shouldered his rucksack and began a swift walk back along the way he had come the day before. It would be a long day of hiking to reach his hunting ground, and running would only slacken his strength. Some jeered at his tardy gait, while others laughed. Still others prayed good fortune on the merry piper, and waved to him until he passed over the hill and out of sight. The princess watched him go, staying her eyes upon his steadily diminishing figure, until she could no longer see him. Then she rushed upon the citadel to the highest battlement, and watched the men spread out over the duke's lands, all the while keeping a prayer for Tobias in her heart. The city was restless that day, and every house had on the roof a lad with sharp eyes on the lookout for returning hunters. The competition was fierce. These hunters were no riffraff. By the closing of the gates on the first day, many had returned bearing the head and shoulders of a stag. That's a very large male deer. Some boasted of one-shot kills, others claimed dead-eye shots on the run. But none of the trophies were yet so remarkable as to guarantee certain victory. In the evening, the people passed from tent to tent and made a fuss, arguing about which animal was best, until there was heard a great boom, boom, boom at the gate. At once the guards opened the porthole, for fear whoever was beating at the gate might accidentally knock it down. Matthias had returned with a great prize, so great in fact that the guards were obliged to swing wide both doors to admit it. It was the king of stags. The half-molted antlers that Matthias hefted spread out of the severed head like a fuzzy bone bush. The rack of antlers scarcely fit through the narrow streets, and none dared to pass him on the way for fear of getting a poke in the eye when he hefted the prize for all to see. "It is the greatest stag in the fiefdom," he declared, while those who had bet on him cheered, and those who hadn't sulked and accused him of cheating by bringing the head of a long-dead deer. But it was indeed a fresh kill. The naysayers only denied it out of a false bitter hope. "How did you manage it?" Haddock shouted from his tent, as his dogs barked angrily at Matthias. Haddock was a sour and gnarly hunter with a foul mouth and foul breath, and otherwise dangerous. "The great stag knows the scent of all the hunters. You can't track it." "I did," Matthias explained, "for weeks, staying downwind and never crossing its paths. I discovered its habits and hideaways. Patience is the greatest weapon a hunter possesses. See, there are no others so large. This will be my prize, and by it the tournament is won." "Not so," said an old man with a pipe in his hand, from his seat on an empty barrel. "The young master over yonder has carried upon his back the entire carcass of his stag. Though its antlers be not as grand, it is altogether a bigger prize." Hearing this, Matthias said not a word, but dropped his antlers and walked straight out of the city in the middle of the night, carrying only a heavy wooden spear. "He left his bow," said one observer. "Hardly matters," said another. "The look on his face could kill." Then, to a roar of laughter, the merrymakers congratulated their returned hunters with song and drink. The following evening, Matthias returned with the entire carcass of a great tusked boar. What's a boar? Well, it's like a pig, but huge and mean. With tusks. Which he dragged upon 2 lashed logs with some difficulty, stopping every 4th mile to rest. Some women brought him water while he was still without the gates, but he refused it, and dragged the boar the remainder of the way by its legs. That evening he slept, but in the morning he learned that a hunter had killed a bear and brought its skin. So he went back out again, running as swiftly as a deer, and disappeared into the forest. "He left his spear and his bow," said one heckler. "He's gone crackers." "I don't think it matters," said the other. "Crackers or not, he'll be back with a bear before sundown. You can bet on that." By noon on the 3rd day and last day of the tournament, all but 8 hunters had returned. By 3 o'clock, all but 5. 3 of those were accounted deserters, as they had obtained no prize and dropped out. That left 2. The same 2 who had arrived together the night before the tournament. The great hunter Matthias, you guessed it, and the merry piper Tobias. By 6 o'clock, a great black thing appeared on the horizon. The boys watching from up on the wall claimed it was a bear walking upon 2 legs. But it was Matthias, of course. He had killed a he-bear with only a knife in his hands and taken its fur, which was draped across his shoulders, so that he appeared in the very likeness of a walking bear. This, taken in manly, hand-to-claw combat, was surely a greater prize than one captured with dogs and arrows. Wearing his prize over his shoulders like a victor's flag, Matthias entered the city to cheers and shouts. In the square, the spectators flocked to his spot on the commons, where his stag head, his boar, and his bear pelt were stretched out for all to see. The Duke, ever watchful for any fun, had come early and was making his way through the crowds, hearing stories from hunters of stolen prey and near misses and so on, growing merrier all the time until he came to the place where Matthias was, but not his tent, for he had none. "Are these the greatest prizes, then?" he asked. "The stag is the largest I've ever seen, the hog is terrifying even dead, and the bear skin is larger than my bed." The crowd laughed until one heckler bellowed, "But what about the princess's bed?" "Ah," called the Duke, "a foul joke. Get on, you rascal." The Duke's runner chased down the kid, and to teach him a lesson by tossing him face first into the mire, to a roar of laughter from the crowd. "Dirty boys make dirty jokes," Elias the runner laughed. "Next time, ask about the princess's bath. That would have been a clean jest." Which was even funnier. "The princess's bath!" cried the Duke, waving his hand to ward off the chuckles, but his gut was already rolling with laughter. "The princess's bath!" But by now, all the people were in a riotous mood, laughing and laughing at people who were laughing, and clutching at their sides, and hooting and hawing, and red in the face, doubled over, slapping their knees, and falling on the ground. Not a one could catch a decent breath before his fellow burst out with laughter and sprayed his beer into the air, and the whole chorus caught the giggles all over again. His people were all so giddy that the Duke, who was almost crying with laughter, thought this scene alone was worth all the trouble of raising a daughter and having a tournament to get her married. Until a little child came up to the Duke and pulled at his breeches. "Excuse me." The Duke, for joy in watching all the laughter, did not hear the boy, but the lad was persistent. "Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me." At last the Duke bellowed, "What is it?" And the boy jumped 9.5 inches. "There's a fellow outside the gate, says he has a prize, but it's too big to bring in. And he bid you, come without the gates and see it for yourself." "A prize? Too big to bring inside the gates?" The Duke roared. "Now this is rich." He turned to his chief counter. "How many are yet to return or bow out?" "Just one, sire." The answer hung from the lips of all the gathered crowd as the Duke whispered the words, "The piper." He lifted an eyebrow, raised his glass, downed the remains, and tossed the cup, which bounced off the head of the boy who had made the dirty joke that was just now emerging from the mud. With that distraction, the old Duke turned and dashed for the gate, intending to be the first to see the great prize. It was a grand procession and a race in one, led by the Duke, who ran very quickly for his age to see what waited outside the walls. He was followed by all the people, who ran upon each other to keep up, and then crashed again as they slowed so as not to overtake the Duke, which would have been bad form. At the Duke's approach, the castle guards swung wide the doors so that the whole throng spilled out onto the meadow. And this is what they saw. Standing in the field outside the gate were 20 some odd deer, some grazing, some sitting. The Duke spied a cord, just a string, around the necks of the animals, and then, to his astonishment, in the center of the herd, a piper, piping upon a set of miniature pipes from which sound only came out of every second or third pipe which the Hamliner blew upon. This magical song, whatever it was, seemed to be keeping the deer transfixed and kept them from running. "It is black magic," warned the bishop, who was leaning over the shoulder of the Duke, panting. "Even so," said the Duke, "it is the greatest prize I have ever seen. It's an entire herd. This prize alone bests all the rest put together." "But it has to be delivered into your hand," Cato retorted. "Could you receive such a prize into your hand, it's no different than coming back with a story." "But it is a great prize," the Duke argued. He was very stubborn, and furthermore he enjoyed arguing with the bishop, because it so bothered the bishop to be argued with. But even as they bickered, there came out from the crowd one girl in a dress. But the Duke was so involved with his arguments with the priest, he did not notice. It was his daughter, the princess, who came so softly and so mildly that she put her hand upon a doe and then its fawn, and stroked the soft spotted, I knew you would like this part, and stroked the soft spotted brown fur. The fawn nuzzled the princess's hand as she bent down and picked it up and cradled it in her arms. Amazed and overcome, with tears of joy bursting from her happy eyes, she whispered, "It is enough," to Tobias, who was very near but still piping, appearing to be at the point of exhaustion. "You have captured the beauty of nature and not killed it. You shall be the winner." But the priest and the Duke came rashly forward into the herd and disturbed the animals, which caused Tobias to be taken by surprise. The moment he stopped playing his wild song, the deer bolted at once in all directions, snapping the cords, so that before the sun dipped over the horizon, not a single head was left in sight, save the fawn held by the princess in her arms. "Now see," the former priest of Hamlin said, "the prize never came inside the city, so it was never delivered, so he cannot win." Not so," said the Duke, "for I received the prize by seeing it with my own eyes." "But that's not in the rules." "Then what are we to do about such an extraordinary circumstance?" the Duke bellowed. "For I cannot let him win according to the rules, and I cannot give him the prize to another according to the rules." Then Bishop Cato bent low over the Duke and spoke into his ear for nearly a minute. The Duke nodded, and the herald blew upon his horn until all the people were quieted. "Due to extraordinary circumstances, the Duke is required to make another contest to determine whether Tobias the Piper or Matthias the Hunter be the best, and he has permitted the bishop to call for a second challenge to be answered by these two, who shall be our finalists." There was a great cheer, and Tobias and Matthias were again brought to stand before the Duke and his counselor, the bishop. Anna Marie remained in the field with her fawn. Tobias guessed she was crying and would not come because her father had let the bitter priest ruin Tobias's fair victory. Once more, the two friends stood side by side. They shook hands. "Well done," said Matthias. "Well done," answered Tobias. "I could not have matched your prize." This he said as he had already heard from the arguing in the crowd what Matthias had brought. "Nor I yours. You were the cleverest, and I am the strongest. Now what challenge shall be put upon us to decide who is best?" Tobias shrugged. "I hope it isn't cooking. I gave you my best spoon." Matthias laughed. "And I gave you my best pheasant." Again they shook hands to applause from the crowd. Then the Duke quieted the people. Now Bishop Cato rose up, his red robes billowing in the evening breeze. He declared, "It is hereby acknowledged that these two are unmatched in their skill and knowledge of the forest, and so we must bring a new challenge, great enough to match such skill." He was answered by, "Hear, hear," from the crowd. But what beast could withstand so clever a trap as the piper's piping, or so swift an arrow as the hunter's? "None," returned the crowd in unison. "And so the prize shall not be a beast of the field, but a beast of the devil, which is more clever and more difficult to kill, and may fight back, and may have allies to defend it." Murmurs ran through the crowd, and even some little girls screamed. "I speak of the goblins! These dread foes of righteousness, who infest the distant hills and who have, on occasion, infected our own children with their black curse, and even carried some away. Let the champions bring to the Duke the head of a goblin, that this curse may be brought to light in the sight of all the people, and the true hero of the realm be thus discovered. The first to put a goblin's skull into the hands of the Duke shall wed the princess." Some booed, calling it crockery, and shouted, "There is no such thing as goblins, Bishop. Have you gone mad?" "It's true," Matthias called out suddenly, raising his deep voice above the din. "I have seen a goblin with my own eyes, bearing a captive girl into a hidden cave. And in so great a hurry to gather reinforcements to rescue her, my father succumbed to illness and perished. I will accept this challenge. I have looked forward since that day that I might take revenge on this evil. My hands are ready, for I fear nothing, be it beast or devil." "And what about the piper?" the bishop sneered. Now he did this because he knew Tobias. He knew Tobias would never slay a goblin, as his sister had been one. "I shall live to see the princess die a maiden," he announced, "for I will defend the goblins. They are kin to us, merely children taken by a disease that turns their skins to stony gray, but their hearts are yet pure." "Silence!" the bishop roared. "I will hear none such blasphemy." He pointed a long finger at Tobias. "You, lad, had best decide whose side you will choose, as the hunter has made up his mind to be on God's side, and I'll wager he will succeed where you will fail. Let the quest begin." No sooner had the bishop made this announcement than Matthias roared in his anger, for now was the day of his long-awaited revenge. He gathered his bow and spear and set off into the wood amid the gathering dark. Tobias had no chance to stop Matthias or to caution him against killing goblins for sport. He was one of the few who understood how the goblins came to be. Seeing Matthias hurrying into the forest gave Tobias the urge to follow after and chase him down so that he might testify of the bishop's dark heart and explain how the goblins had saved his sister, far from snatching her away as Father Cato wished to do. But in this his hopes were dimmed, for Matthias was the swifter of them, and he could travel day and night and run 50 or 100 miles at a time. This dangerous young man was the most determined in the fiefdom to get his revenge for his father's untimely death. Tobias knew he could not best the hunter by strength. What could he do? No, he could not breathe fire on him. Davy. I need a horse, he thought. A powerful horse. But Tobias, being urged by the crowd, and partly to give himself space to think, followed after Matthias by making a show of trying to catch up. But when he reached the woods, he drew aside and lay down in the brush and waited as he had practiced aforetime in the woods near Hamlin. Later that evening, at a pub in Hanover, two men bent over a game of chess, pushing rough lathed wooden pieces over the faded board set on a barrel. One was dressed in a brown friar's habit, just a long plain hooded tunic tied by a simple cord which was worn by monks. He wore a miserable false mustache, which didn't move properly when he spoke. The hood was drawn over his eyes. Who do you think it was in this poor disguise? It was not a humble friar, but was in fact the Bishop of Hanover. The man seated across from him was wrapped in a riding cloak of fine black wool. A wide-brimmed hat sat low over his eyes. His frame was thin and his skin pale, but his presence in the pub was like that of a snake. Even the servers avoided him, though he paid well for his drinks, taking as many as he liked and never getting drunk. What were they doing? They were plotting and scheming in the most foul, self-serving way. Even the angels, whose job it was to take notes, shivered and winced as they penned the words into the book of sins. It was a devil's pact, a plan that sold the dear Princess Anna Marie and Claire and her goblins into a terrible fate. It was a powerful move, bringing the night into play, the black-cloaked man said, speaking in an accent rich with the Romanian air. He hunts with a vengeful purpose. But are you sure your strategy will bring you the pieces you want? It will, said the fellow opposite him, whose speech was verily that of Bishop Cato. Soon the board will be cleared of those miserable pawns, he stated, confidently capturing one of his opponent's chess pieces. Now the thin black-cloaked man opposite him spoke again in his foreign accent. If the bishop wishes to pressure the king, May I suggest removing the queen? You mean she who would be queen, Cato whispered, with lips that trembled slightly. Yes, of course, I mean the princess, the shadowy fellow said in a hissing whisper. But that's out of the question, isn't it? The stranger stared at the man in disguise, eyes burning. Not for me. I have searched for a prize such as this for more years than you can imagine. It's getting spooky, huh? Yeah, and the wind is picked up. Can you hear it? Blustery weather all of a sudden. I'll not allow this treasure to be given to another. Hear this. I shall grant you what you need to eliminate those pesky pond goblins, but I will take the queen for myself. That is my fee. If you only intend to capture her, then I will consent. I thought for a moment you had something more dire in mind. The black-robed gentleman leaned forward. His all-black eyes showed from under the brim of his top hat. There are things worse than death, friend, if that's what you mean. He moved a chess piece swiftly to capture the last remaining queen on the board. Ah, by this challenge you mean to draw out the king, said the bishop in disguise. Leaning very close, he whispered to his conspirator. The Duke will certainly blame the goblins for his daughter's disappearance. Precisely, said the man in a cold, hard, merciless voice. He ran a pale pink tongue over the top of his thin upper lip. I shall have what I want, the princess's hand, and you shall have your prize. The goblins will be undone, you will have the victory and glory, and with that glory you will have power and influence, even authority. Isn't that what you want? Only so much as I need to best serve my fellow man, Cato clarified, with a heartless smile that carried all the warmth of a strong north wind in February. But I must have some time to arrange the pieces. I give you 3 days. Then I will come for my queen. Fine, Cato agreed tersely. The presence of the black-cloaked visitor was unnerving, even to the counselor of the Duke. But I shall have no part in it. Attend to your business, Black Bishop. I will attend to mine. And with a flourish of his cloak, the thin man soundlessly fled the pub. Cato left a silver coin on the table and hurried out as well, nearly losing his false mustache in a collision with a brutish woodsman just coming in. He neither apologized nor looked back, as the bishop muttered anxiously to himself. The only word the woodsman understood was the name Haddock. The woodsman shivered with disgust. When it was very dark and very silent, Tobias took the bits of fine cord in his hand that had once held the deer and then tied together the broken ends. Then he took a gnarled branching root and made of it a grappling hook, which he fixed to the end of the cord. He doubled the cord on itself by folding it at the center and secured it with knots along its length to increase its strength. By this means, Tobias hoped to enter the town of Hanover in secret, by scaling the outer wall so that he might get himself a horse. Time was indeed precious if he hoped to save some poor goblin from Matthias's arrow. So Tobias gathered his looped cord over his shoulder and held the grappling hook in his hand, but left his pipes and his sack hidden in the brush. He stole stealthily across the open fields that lay before the city where the cattle grazed, then rounded the city halfway until he stood at the base of the wall beneath the citadel itself, the Duke's castle. He stopped to listen and heard several noises coming from open windows, but still had no clue as to where he might find the princess. Then, being patient, he was rewarded as the wind shifted slightly and brought the sound of crying. It was the princess. That's the end of this chapter. Thanks for joining us for the Goblin Curse of Hamlin. That was chapter 10. Join us again next time for chapter 11. I'm author Dan Allen. We'll see you next time.